it's week 3. This week we're going to read about and explore the technological context of social entrepreneurship and begin work on project 2. Chances are that you have in your pocket, in your hand, next to you, computing and network power we couldn't have imagined 15 years ago. A lot of my work, my research, focuses on digital spaces and the ways in which technology is changing the ways we write, we work, we play, we communicate, we live. But in July 2017, NPR had a morning story about the fact that 24 million Americans in rural areas don't have broadband internet service. The reporter described families where a parent would have to drive their kids into town, park outside a fast food restaurant that offered Wi-Fi or the public library so they could get online so their kids could actually upload their homework before school because they didn't have access at home. The pandemic context we're living in has definitely exacerbated connectivity issues for all of us as we rely on reaching out, connecting, learning, and working via Wi-Fi and our devices. During spring 2021, Facebook reported 1.88 billion active daily users. Facebook is still the leading social media platform, reaching about 60% of social media users around the world. Facebook is the second most searched word on Google after YouTube. If Facebook were a country, it'd be the largest in the world. And this is just Facebook. TikTok, as you likely know, has been exploding over the last couple months, and Instagram is maintaining a strong user base. These are big numbers, but based on World Bank statistics, only 7% of the population of Burundi has access to electric power. Not the internet, to power. It's 8% in Chad and about 80% in India. As you look at the cases for this week, I'd like you to think about 3 things. First is the global context we read and talked about last week and how that comes into play in a digital context. Second, how social entrepreneurs are leveraging technology to make change in the world. And third, how social entrepreneurial approaches might help us address issues related to access to electric power, technology, and digital connections. In this video, I'll first discuss creativity and social entrepreneurship, preview our week 3 readings, cases, and sparks, and then introduce our Project 2 work. Before I introduce Project 2, I want to talk a bit more about the creative context of social entrepreneurship because I think creativity is perhaps the most important resource that we have access to. I want to share a few creativity cases first. I would argue that each of these are entrepreneurially anchored and focused on social good. First, the Immune Touch, created by Matthew Tolles and Joseph Tolles, co-founders of the company Slightly Robot. We've all gotten used to Fitbits, Apple Watches, and other wrist devices that track our health and other statistics. If you're wearing one of these smart bands, they buzz if you move your hand near your face. These were originally created to help people who engage in compulsive skin picking or nail biting or hair pulling. But the brothers adapted the design so it could be more broadly used in a pandemic context where we all needed to be really aware of how often we were touching our faces. And the band helps train us to be more aware of this and to stop doing it so much. A second example, Steve Brooks, a designer in London, created Hygiene Hook, a door hook that you can easily keep in your pocket. He's selling them and donating 1 hook for every one that he sells. And entire industries are getting involved in innovating around COVID. For instance, we know that testing for COVID is crucial to understand where and how it's spreading. In the US last year, we didn't have a national supply of swabs to test with. About a year ago, swabs were primarily manufactured by 2 major companies in the US and northern Italy. But a consortium of 3D printing companies stepped in and shifted their manufacturing and production to print swabs for use. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration released a report this March 2021 on the role of additive manufacturing in support of the U.S. COVID response. The purpose of the report was to provide an overview of what people were making to help respond to COVID. Face shields are one of the most produced items, as were 3D printable swabs. Although tons of people were making and selling and giving away face masks, the FDA didn't really consider those because although they were important, they couldn't be assured to be medical grade. And the graphic on the screen right now is included in the report to show the production and distribution of additively manufactured items. CAD Crowd is a California-based company that helps connect people to CAD innovators, and they recently launched a contest encouraging people to create practical devices for navigating our pandemic world. A ton of people with access to or who own 3D printers came up with dozens of devices, the designs for which are open source and fully available on the CAD Crowd website. The third prize winner was a hand untoucher, a fairly simply created but ergonomic tool for pushing buttons and picking up items. America Makes is the national organization representing additive manufacturing and how different people are participating in and extending our supply chain. They're also devoted to open source sharing of code and files and data. Another example has to do with breweries. Last week on Packback, I mentioned that Founders Brewing in Grand Rapids has partnered with Long Road Distillery to produce hand sanitizer. Long Road, as of March 2020, had shifted its entire production from making spirits to making hand sanitizer at a moment where we desperately needed more access to sanitizer. This isn't a product, but rather an innovative experience. Museums that have transitioned during COVID to online exhibits. With schools closed and parents trying to be teachers at home, and with all of us disconnected from critical social and cultural resources like museums, which are opening back up now, virtual exhibits became incredibly impactful. Google Arts and Culture is a relatively new nonprofit initiative where Google is working with cultural institutions and artists to bring art and culture online so it's more accessible to anyone with an internet connection. They partnered with the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, the Palace Museum in Beijing, China, the National Museum in New Delhi, India, and others. This is a project bigger than the pandemic context. There are various ways to interact with and explore different museums, galleries, and art through Google Arts and Cultures. One of my favorite ways to explore is through the color experience. And you can also earn badges as you explore. I would argue that each of these examples are creativity cases, specifically examples of innovation in a critical moment and examples designed for social good. Next, I want to look a bit more specifically at creative processes. In middle or high school, you might have had a poster like this hanging in your classroom. This is a clear, succinct way to represent the writing process. First, you invent or pre-write. You create outlines, you make notes about what you want to write about, then you write. You create a draft, you revise it, you edit it before sharing. This is tidy, but I don't necessarily think it's accurate. Most writers edit across the writing process. Most writers pre-write and invent across the writing task. I created an image for a book I recently wrote presenting a romanticized notion of the media composing process. So let's say this person is working on a short public service video for a class project. We might think she or he gathers clips, writes a script, selects music, and then sequences them together. Realistically, though, it's a lot messier than that. When I put together these weekly class videos, I have some of the music identified, I have a script I write and revise, I gather images, then I sift through them, I figure out which I want to use and which I need to create or edit. I find or rip video clips, I record myself, I do a lot of editing, I edit the music, I do some screencasting, I edit the screencasting. This isn't a clean, linear process. And if you do a search for creative process online, you'll find images like this and this. And you might find quotes from famous people like J.J. Abrams, who said, "The creative process is a bit like driving in the fog. One often has a sense of destination, but the journey may end up taking some surprising twists and turns." You'll find a ton of suggestions like Charlie Gilkey's 4 steps of creativity: preparation, incubation, illumination, and implementation. Or Jessica Stillman's preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification. Or James Taylor's preparation, incubation, insight, evaluation, and elaboration. And Tiffany Schlane's list is a bit more extensive. She suggests The hunch is a first step. You think you've got an idea, you're not sure where to go with it, so you talk about it, you talk the idea through with a range of people, you become a sponge and sponge up ideas from everywhere to help nurture the idea. You build, you create, you make, you do. Confusion. You face a moment in a project where you lose sight of your goals or you question your idea, so you just step away. You take a breather, you let the idea sit. Then you come back and fall in love with your idea. You have a premature breakthroughation. The many small breakthroughs that happen across a project or cultivating an idea. You revisit your notes, you start over, go in different directions. And importantly, she says, you know when you're done. There are some fantastic representations of the daily schedules of the famously creative, like Maya Angelou. Interestingly, she did most of her work in hotel rooms, both as she traveled and by preference. I have a colleague who, when he needs to get a significant amount of writing done, like a draft of a book, he'll check himself into a hotel for like 2 weeks because he says he can work there without distraction. This is Beethoven's typical daily schedule. And Darwin's, a bit more varied than Angelou's or Beethoven's. And Tchaikovsky's. There are two things I find pretty interesting about these. First, they're almost all white guys of the same social class and generally the same time frame, except for Maya Angelou, who's a contemporary writer. Second, all of these people worked before the internet and the web and social media. I wonder what sort of influence these technologies have had on today's famously creative people. In a recent article in Campaign magazine, a US-based magazine for advertisers, Oliver McTeer wrote about how the COVID context is changing creative processes. He described how typically creating ad campaigns involve getting insights from customers, engaging in rounds of brainstorming and developing, testing out ideas, editing and finalizing, testing again, and then moving toward final production. He said that COVID means that advertisers have to be much more nimble, flexible, and quick in their creative processes. And an example he mentions is a recent Live Nation campaign that was imagined, ideated, and produced across an email chain over 5 days. The same way of working was put into play for an April 2020 Snuggle campaign. For this, a director who works with an ad agency used his kids and wife as actors and filmed this himself in his home.
I think that sounds great. Let's discuss in the staff meeting tomorrow. Should we discuss the change to the distribution bill and what the total cost is?
What I hope these cases and these creative process examples show is that creativity is organic. It lives, it breathes, it changes shape. It isn't one set process or set of steps. It's a process that relies on context, community, culture, and connection. I encourage you, the next time you nurture an idea or working on a piece of homework or a project, maybe getting started on project 2, you spend some time reflecting on your creative processes, how you creatively approach a task and move it across phases of development. We tend to romanticize creativity and think that creative people are just born creative and jump out of bed every morning with creative ideas bursting forth from their brains. That's not the case. Creativity is something that has to be nurtured and designed, just like entrepreneurial thinking. So while you're reflecting on your own creative processes and capacities this week, we're going to be exploring the technological context of social entrepreneurship. As you can imagine, digital tools, technologies, places, and spaces have absolutely transformed the ways in which we can build and make change in the world and connect across spaces, cities, towns, countries, continents. We'll read a piece by Ashoka first. Ashoka is, according to their website, the largest network of social entrepreneurs worldwide. Next, we'll read a short piece about social tech entrepreneurs. Our third reading is a chapter by Blake Mykoski, and we'll learn more about Tom's shoes. Technology is one resource that social entrepreneurs rely on, but there are many other resources critical to successful initiatives. And in the chapter, Mykoski talks more about the technological and other resources required to build and launch Tom's. The next two pieces are cases. They're short videos that help explain and situate our contemporary social and digital media landscape. And finally, for this week, we have two sparks. The first is an example of leveraging digital media for social good. It's the Free Rice Project. Read about the project and then play the game. The second is a set of 5 profile pieces. You don't have to read all 5 unless you want to. Maybe focus on 1 or 2. Each of these are great examples of the type of writing and work I'd like you to explore for Project 2. For Project 2, you're going to do some profiling, researching, and representing. Specifically, you're going to identify a social entrepreneur you find interesting, research and find out more about them and their background, and write an article formatted profile piece. So this is about a person like Blake Mycoskie, not necessarily a social business like Tom's. If you know someone engaged in social entrepreneurial projects, you might interview them and write an interview-based profile. And some of the cases for this week are examples of interview-based profiles. If you're interested in someone we've read briefly about for class and you want to dig a bit more into their background and the work that they do, you might read their Twitter feed, find and read articles about them, find and read articles by them to help you develop your Project 2 profile piece. The full assignment and some really helpful past student examples of this type of writing and how you might approach formatting and laying it out are on D2L in the Assignments and Dropboxes folder. We're covering a lot of ground this week. As always, please text or email me if you have any questions about the Week 3 readings, cases, and sparks, or about getting started on Project 2.